Hey, Sistahs! It's Charity Gates, your host. I'm a New York City-based attorney working at a arts and entertainment law firm. And I'm proud to say I'm back. I'm bringing the podcast back. I wanted to do an episode about my career arc and some of the connections I've seen made, and also to put out some content for y'all to consume, to see how you can live this kind of life too. I just want to give this to my sisters, especially sisters who are looking to be in the law, who are in the law, and cultivate some community aspect. So I hope you give it a listen. So, as I was saying in the intro, I wanted to do a solo episode kind of going into my journey into the law and how I got to where I'm at in my career now. It's just been a lot of reflection going on right now in my life. So I see some of the pivotal moments that have happened in this story arc. So it's easier to kind of recount and go back to see what some of those highlights were. And getting into where my interest in the law started, I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, in the suburbs, and I always had this passion for traveling and wanting to live in a city. And at the time, Atlanta wasn't really a big city, and so my dreams were to live in places like New York. Paris also came up later in my childhood after seeing the Olsen twins travel there, so that was on my list. And another thing was wanting to work in creative industry. So 13 going on 30 was one of my all-time favorite movies. Shout out to Jennifer Garner because that was on my vision board for life. I wanted to be a fashion magazine editor. That was one of my goals. And watching that movie was like seeing my whole career goals and life goals in one film, even though it was Hollywood. But growing up with Black parents, of course, fashion, arts, those type of creative jobs weren't things that they understood or could have a guidepost around. So growing up with Black parents wasn't the best intro to having an arts related career because it wasn't something that they understood or saw a clear pathway towards surviving in. And so my mom in particular was vital in encouraging me to be a lawyer for the magazine rather than necessarily being the editor at the magazine. And so she kind of put it so, or at least sowed the seeds of wanting to be a lawyer and thinking of being a lawyer in a creative sense, like being a lawyer for creatives. My parents being encouragers of law school, kind of like that was childhood, like kind of growing up knowing I would eventually do some kind of professional career. And I think it was also them being first generation college graduates, and then my dad was a doctor. So he always encouraged us to kind of pursue bigger professional career paths. So I knew grad school was in my future. It was just when it was going to happen. But I was never one of those kids that grew up saying, I want to argue in court or I want to do this. It was always that kind of transactional cultural mindset, which is so funny that now I'm doing exactly that. I think little Charity will be proud. But because I love traveling so much and watching it, and I think growing up in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a lot of cinematic content of women traveling and going abroad, doing amazing things professionally, even. And so that kind of gave me the admiration to want to pursue global studies. And so by the time I was in high school, I ended up doing the Duke Tip program, which was set in the Netherlands. So we did 2 weeks in at Duke and then a week and a half in the Netherlands. And it was more like an international law type program. So when I was 16, that was the first time that I traveled abroad, was through that program. And my parents are very encouraging around doing that program because, number one, it was associated with an elite university. And number two, I would be going in a group. So again, with Black parents, they weren't really keen on me going abroad by myself, but they also wanted to cultivate that interest in traveling and experiencing life outside of the US. So I'm grateful that they were able to support me on that trip. And then later that same year, I ended up going to France with my high school. And we were doing, it was a STEM high school, so science, technology, engineering, and math. And I was not ever really a STEM kid, but that was something I got tracked into because of my parents, of course. They were STEM people. So they kind of encouraged that level of intellectual curiosity from that standpoint. And we were doing research projects and got to present while we were over in France. So after that, I was like, okay, how do I get back to this country? How do I live here? Because little Charity always wanted to go to France. So like when I was a teenager and had that opportunity, I just wanted to know how to get back. And those seeds kept growing and growing. And also just these initial experiences abroad were seeds for the rest of my life, because that travel bug never left me, and it was something that was pivotal that I learned in college about cultural exchange and learning in depth about cultures and the way that people live. I just had this innate love for human design and how humans interact with each other, sociology, all the things. But I think that's what led me to, in college, study international studies. And so everything in my life, which I've noticed thus far, has been dreams that I have internally. And then when I go to pursue those dreams, there could be a closed door. And then that reroutes me to something else. And that started with college, where my dream school was NYU. I really wanted to get to New York. It was at 13 going on 30 motivation. I want to go to New York. I want to be in fashion. I want to do these things. And I got waitlisted to NYU. And so that was a closed door. But then I got into Emory. Oxford College of Emory was where I started, which is a 2-year school. It's the older campus of Emory, but then you go to the Atlanta campus 2 years later. So I think that opportunity to start at a smaller school and then go to the bigger school was really pivotal for me, even though my 18-year-old self was like, man, why did this happen to me? But I think that was the divine path that I had to be on, the deferred dreams, in order to get to where I am now. So, studied international studies, but it was really once I got to the Atlanta campus, I really cultivated my interest in the arts, because it was such a world class education, and the school had so many resources. I was exposed to so much culturally at my time, during my time at Emory. I even saw Theaster Gates spoke during my spring semester, my senior year, which was a lot later, but it was one of those moments where I was like, wow, I had never known who he was before. And his name, of course, we had the same last name. So I was like, who is this man? And then I heard him speak and I realized his robust artistic career. I was like, how do I get to listen to these types of conversations all the time? So Emory was like a really important time period to focus on that cultivation of the arts and education. But also, my travel bug energy was still there. So I studied abroad again at Emory. First, I studied in Ecuador. I did a 2-week program there with a sociology class. So I got to see South America for the first time. And then I knew that I wanted a fuller experience. So my junior year at Emory, that was probably one of the most pivotal moments in my college career, was studying abroad in Paris my spring semester. And definitely back to sowing the seeds from childhood, that was accomplishing a lifelong dream of living in Paris and being able to go back to Paris after that high school opportunity. And that's when I really strengthened my French skills. So I lived with a host family. I had to speak French with them most of the time, even though my host dad was more of an English speaker. He he was still good at helping me navigate with French too. So I really learned so much about French culture even through them, and just daily life, having to live in Paris. I learned how to live in a city. That was another important thing that happened, was and honestly was probably the best preparation for then eventually moving to New York later in life, dealing with winter in a city, with people that aren't always the most friendly every day. So that language skill really came in. It was important for me to cultivate that skill, because it would actually later benefit me in my legal career, which I'll get to later. And while I was in Paris, I attended Sciences Po, which is it's a renowned school for cultivating global leaders, particularly in law, political science, economics, some humanities. But when you hear Sciences Po in France, it's like their top political leaders usually go to school there. So it's kind of like the Harvard of France. So that the legal element was still kind of a thread line, in that experience. And I met so many people, and a lot of people who go to school there, of course, because they have that reputation for creating leaders. At Sciences Po, there was a lot of people who wanted to be global leaders, political leaders, even. And so I met people from so many different countries. And one person I met who really was kind of the highlight of my experience there was a woman from Senegal. And she was in one of my classes, and we just developed a quick friendship, just talking about our shared cultural values, like between Senegalese culture and Black American culture. And it kind of put Senegal on my radar because I didn't really know about the country that much beforehand. So she really had so much insight about that, and it kind of just stuck with me. And so as I was going through my senior year at Emory, the following semester, I was like, how do I get back abroad? How do I travel again? How do I do this without that much money? Because, of course, it was something that I didn't have any, um, I guess I would call it examples, for lack of a better word, of people who traveled after attending college. It just seemed like such a far off concept, that only rich people could do. So I was adamant about finding programs that would allow me to just travel, and but also reconcile that desire with still wanting to go to law school at some point. So it was the pressure, the combined pressure to go to grad school, that was instigated by Emory's pre-professional, culture, as well as having Black parents that were like, "You need to go to school. You need to do this before you never go." And they didn't really understand the importance of a gap year or what that even meant, even gap years, if I'm being honest. This was before Malia Obama had her gap year experience. So I did not have another Black person that I knew of, at least, to kind of show that it's possible to do it. But in hindsight, I do wish I would have leaned into that intuition and traveled a little bit more before I went to school, and taking a little bit longer to understand what my true desires were beyond just parental or even like the university's pushings to go a certain direction. But that being said, I still decided on the Fulbright teaching assistant program, which was something that Emory was really good at getting students into. We had a really competitive applicant pool. And so a lot of us, most of the people who applied typically got accepted, which was really strong for the university. But that allowed me to spend 9 months in Senegal with plenty of resources, thanks to the US government. Thank you, taxpayers. So that was the way that I was able to live abroad post grad, but not have to worry about how to financially support myself so much. But I think that time in Senegal was the exact mental flexibility and preparation I needed to be thrust into the culture of law school, because I had really had to. That was my first time in on the continent of Africa, first time in Senegal, so it was a huge culture shock, living wise, spiritually, mentally, everything. It was a complete different world, and I was teaching English to people whose first language was a plethora of different languages that are indigenous to Senegal, and then French was another language that was widely spoken. But the part of Senegal that I lived in, I learned that French was actually not their first language. So they were learning French as I was kind of learning French too. So English was an even higher barrier, and to kind of teach young people who were interested in it, but then also had no kind of connection to English, it was really hard. And I think that experience really helped me before law school. But I don't think I would have known that going into the experience. But I was applying for law school while I was living in Senegal because I wanted to go um, pretty soon after I finished my program there, because it was a set time frame. So I knew when I would be leaving, when I would be coming back stateside. And of course, back to Little Charity, I wanted to be in New York. So finding a school that was in New York, that I could get to as soon as I finished my program, was really the impetus for applying to New York area law schools. But I also just kind of spread a broad net to schools that had strong intellectual property programs, particularly in the arts and entertainment industry. So that intersection of IP and arts and entertainment. Um, and back to having a dream that doesn't necessarily have to happen exactly as you envision it. But my dream schools were NYU and Columbia, of course, because partly because of the prestige. And they also had opportunities to study abroad in law school. So they still had, Columbia had a connection with Sciences Po again, which would have been cool to do as a law student. And then NYU had a French master's program that you could do in connection with a JD. So I had considered that avenue. But unfortunately, the reality was that my LSAT scores weren't strong enough in order to get into those type of schools, despite having the other bona fides on my resume. I think that's when I came across Cardozo as a school that was a possibility. And it was pretty well known for its FAME program, which is Fashion, Art, Media, and Entertainment. And it was in the heart of New York. I'd never heard of it before until I was kind of researching schools. And so when I realized where its position in the city, I was like, wait a minute, this is an option. And then when I got that acceptance letter, I knew I was really being divinely led to go to this school and to live out the very specific goals I had set forth, because I entered law school with a very distinct vision for how I wanted my legal career to go. I wanted to focus on arts and fashion and the laws that intersect with those industries. So I kind of already knew going into law school what I wanted to do, unlike some other students who were kind of willing to try everything and to see what fit for them based on what classes they took. But of course, I wouldn't have known unless I took those classes what it actually entailed. So when I did take those intellectual property classes, that's when I learned the intricacies of the law and started gravitating towards trademark and copyright work. And I could see the intersection between that and arts and fashion. And because Cardozo has such a robust alumni base, there's alums in pretty much all areas of fame and have pretty highly coveted positions at major fashion houses, entertainment companies, and even law firms that specialize or have practice areas that specialize in those industries. So it was very easy for me to get hands-on experiences during law school. So my first internship that was creative was at Louis Vuitton in the general counsel's office. So I worked with real estate counsel, corporate counsel, employment law, and then the GC. But the IP department was kind of separate from that group. So I got more of the corporate side of the legal counseling roles, which was really a lesson to show me how a fashion company actually navigates. And it was like being in a small law firm within the brand. So that really helped cultivate my interest in being on the legal side of the fashion industry. But I think, and also my professors were helpful at getting me those roles. There is one professor in particular, Barbara Colson, who was one of the first GCs at major fashion houses, like actually kind of was instrumental in creating that role because a lot of companies didn't have in-house lawyers before. And general counsel is GC. They are usually the legal person at a company, advising the business people in that company on the legal issues, regulatory, whatever the case may be. And she taught at Cardozo. She was a Cardozo graduate as well. So like she had so many insights and was the perfect person to connect us to these opportunities. And that's basically how I got the Louis Vuitton role, was just her guidance and her connections. And that's why I tell a lot of students too, is a lot of the things that I experienced throughout my career have been through networking and just being open to different people, just listening to their stories and finding a connection point. Because I think every opportunity I had was through some kind of connection. Because the next role that I did was at my current firm. I was an intern my third year, and I applied almost every year of law school and didn't get it until my final year. And I think part of the reason why I got the role was because my resume almost exactly mirrored one of the associates that previously worked at the firm. And we both went to Emory, both went to Cardozo, had both did the same journal, and she was on the internship selection committee. So it just was perfectly aligned for her to be there and to see my resume. So it put it to the top. And then on top of that, that was when Black Panther had come out, and there was a copyright issue that came up with an artist, Lena Iris Victor, whose work was used in Kendrick Lamar and SZA's video. And so that issue, that intersection of Black artists, copyright law, visual arts, was exactly aligned with what I wanted to do. And one of the partners at my firm commented on that article. And so I wrote her and was like, oh my God, I love what you do. How can I do this? And that was around the same time that I was applying. And then they ended up pairing me with her, and she became my mentor at the firm, and still is to this day now that I'm working there. So it was important to have those little connections. And then I rounded out my experience in law school at Christie's. So I graduated in 2020. And when I tell you I did not know what would happen, no one knew what would happen that year. But spring 2020, going along with my life, this is also when I started thinking about sisters in law and connecting Black women in law school together, and also beyond law school, Black women attorneys. I just wanted a space where not necessarily like a bar organization or a professional group, but just more informally, casually meeting up and really discussing our lives in the law, because it's so specific to this career, the things that we have to navigate. So it was important for me to do that and going to school. And so while I was at Christie's, I was doing exactly what I wanted, and then realized that the arts were actually where my passion lied. And I was like, okay, how do I continue this and also do things with Black women in the law on the side? And then the pandemic hit because we were originally doing networking events in the city, like meeting up for brunch or meeting up for dinner and having a conversation with a more senior Black woman in the law who was maybe in house or practicing at a firm. And I did not realize that the pandemic would go on for as long as it did. And so I had to kind of pivot. And then this was also a time when, so my internship also went online, my classes were online, and then I had to take the bar that summer. And a lot of those memories I kind of hid in the depths of my psyche because I it was such a traumatic time period. But in hindsight, it was kind of a blessing in how things played out, because I finished my internship online. But because I had started in person, I really connected with my internship supervisor, who was actually born the day after me. So we really had similar personality traits, and also was a Cardozo alum. So she really was a good mentor for me. And my classes also finished online. It was kind of unceremonious where we just kind of ended our experience together. But I was able to cultivate really strong friendships, even like through sisters in law, too, meeting people. And I think that's really a through line in my career is being a people person and connecting to different people and remembering them. Because that's when I graduated, I did not have a job. And so I was panicking with the bar exam, studying for the bar. Living in New York was so hard at the time. And I was a student, so I didn't have money. And paying rent was hard. So I had moved back home for a little bit. And I was studying for the bar at home, essentially. I had also had, so I went back and forth. I moved back home when they closed the school. And so I was still doing classes online. And then they told us, you guys probably aren't coming back. And so I was like, well, my stuff is still in New York, so I need to go back and maybe study there. And so I thought that the bar was going to happen in New York. So I was like, well, let me just spend 2 months in New York and study for the bar, take the bar. But of course, that moved from July to what eventually became October. My lease was up in July. So I decided I don't have a job. I'm just going to take the L and move back home and save the money. So I literally finished studying for the bar in my parents' basement. What a full circle moment in hindsight. The same people that encouraged me to go through this whole process in the first place. And I so I took it at my aunt's place actually, and then 2 months later found out I passed. But rewind back to July, I was, even when we were told that the bar exam was going to be pushed back, an old classmate of mine reached out and was like, do you have a job yet? Like, I've seen some things available, like maybe you should apply to this. And she sent me an opportunity that I did. It was a freelance job, which was not ideal, but it was something. And it was within the area that I wanted to gain skills in. So it was freelance rights and clearances with the major news organization. So it was a really good resume booster, and I needed work. So I applied, and the cycle went through some of my. I applied, and then after taking the exam, that's when we had actual interviews. And so I was able to do the job remote, even though it was based in New York. And so, but I didn't have to pay rent because I was living home at home. So it ended up working out in hindsight. But because it was part time, I needed something else to do while I was doing that job. And so there was an attorney who actually I have featured her on the podcast before, Whitney McGuire. She had her own solo practice at the time and was representing creatives and creative entrepreneurs and was based in Brooklyn. And I had met her during my time in New York during law school and kind of like kept pursuing her. And then by the time I was studying for the bar, she had reached out as well and was like, "Do you need a job? I need some help here and there during the week. So if you have time, I can happily give you an opportunity to work with me." And so that was amazing too, and just showed the level of relationships that I had built and really strengthen during law school. I think if I wasn't the person that I was, I don't think some of these opportunities would have happened for me. So it was important for me to be that, to show my real personality and beyond just what law school dictated or what school said or parents, whatever. So I really let the real charities shine, and it worked in my favor. And so I got my bar results, all fun and games because it was a positive result. So it was really a blessing. And now that I think back on that time, I wonder if I would have passed if I lived in New York and everything happened the way I thought it would have, having an in-person graduation, taking the bar in person. But the bar is, you take it in this huge conference center and you're around so many people that are nervous um, and wanting to ace this one thing that dictates the rest of their career. But then in the pandemic, we all did it remotely. So we were isolated taking that exam. And even though, truthfully and transparently, I had panic attacks going into the exam, it was nice not to have to see other people experiencing that. So I think looking back on that period, it was probably the blessing I needed for my career. And so flash forward, I'm at home 11 months. So it ended up being almost a year that I had to stay home. But luckily, everybody was working remote, everything had transitioned, and people weren't really in New York in the same way as they used to. Um, Networking, thriving, doing events. So I wasn't really missing out on anything. And I didn't really, and since I had already been doing those things pre pandemic, I had already created those relationships. So being able to come back is really what led me to where I'm at now. So I was scrolling through LinkedIn and there was a French firm that was hiring. And when I realized that they were looking for a junior, I saw the person's name and I was like, I applied for this place while I was in law school. And so it's ironic that I didn't get the internship back then, but the thing that allowed me to get the job at that firm was the Louis Vuitton internship, which I got instead of that internship. So it was like the divinely led placements that had to happen in order to lead to later things. And then my French experience living in Paris, studying in Sciences Po, and then teaching in Senegal were really big highlights for the firm because they represented French companies that were creating US subsidiaries. So having French skills was important. And it was something that I wanted to be able to keep up and to show that I had French skills, but use it in a legal capacity. So I ended up moving back to New York when I started that job. This was end of 2021. And I told them that I wanted to do more intellectual property focused things. And there was a trademark aspect to the practice. So I got to do more of that work. And I kept cultivating that skill. But I also, in terms of keeping connections fresh and strengthening bonds, I was still keeping in touch with the people at my current firm where I interned in my last semester. And so an opportunity came up a year and a half into me working at the French firm, and they were my current firm was hiring, so I ended up transitioning then, and they do exactly, it's the exact alignment of what I wanted my career to be, where it's arts, it's entertainment, it's publishing, but it's looking at various innovative legal issues because we're kind of on the cutting edge of what's happening in the industries now. And a lot of the lawyers that I work with are thinking about those types of issues, and they're kind of creatives themselves. So it's nice to work with a team of people who understand how creatives work, what their mindset is like, and how to advise them, how to be good counselors for them. So all in all, this arc of my life, and also this was I turned 30 in 2024, and it felt like a lot of full circle moments were being highlighted, and I could see the cycles of how certain things happen in my life and how they fit together. So from being a kid in Georgia, wanting to live in New York and seeing it on TV, and also wanting to travel, but then also being intellectually curious, so wanting to have certain schooling experiences, to then understanding what my my level of interest was in the arts. It was all these little stair steps added up to where I'm at now, and it's really incredible to see. And I just wanted to put it in an episode to share with the audience, because I've been doing interview style format before with other attorneys, but I figured I'd turn the camera on myself and talk about my journey, especially since I can see a little bit more of my arc happening and how my career fits together. So I hope it's a blessing to someone else and who's thinking about where they fit in the legal world and how they can fit in it. And being a Black woman in this space, like, it's really hard to navigate. And as a first generation attorney, I needed those people and figureheads in order to know what to do, examples of how to even do this career. Because it didn't seem like it existed until I entered into the world and I started finding the people. And that was also an impetus of Sistahs in Law, was finding the people who are doing the things that you want to do, because they exist. It's just about seeking them out and trying to find a connection point. Um, yeah.